Good evening and welcome to this Tuesday, November 6, 2018 meeting of the Raymore Planning and Zoning Commission. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We'll call roll. Commissioner Wiggins.
Present.
Commissioner Armstrong. Commissioner Bowie. Commissioner Crane. Commissioner Fizer.
Present.
Commissioner Peterman.
Present.
Commissioner Urquia.
Present.
Mayor Turnbow.
Present.
And Commissioner Faulkner is present. Now that we've already done roll call, let me remind you, be sure your microphone is lighted green and speak into the microphone for the record, please. I think we did that quite well. No personal appearances scheduled this evening. One item on our consent agenda, which is approval of minutes from our October 16th, 2018 meeting, and unless any of the commissioners or the mayor have concerns about the minutes, I would entertain a motion either to approve consent agenda or to approve minutes from the October 16th, 2018 meeting.
Chairman, I move that we accept the minutes from the October 16th P&Z meeting.
I'll second it.
Motion by Commissioner Wiggins, second by Commissioner Fizer to, I'm sorry. Get me, oh, well, get me tickled and it'll go. So that was, now I've forgotten, was that to approve the minutes or to approve consent? Okay, to approve the minutes. All those in favor, raise a hand, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 in favor, none opposed, no abstentions. And that takes us to unfinished business. We have no cases this evening under unfinished business, so that takes us to new business. And our first item on the agenda this evening is election of officers. We've got 3 that we can't necessarily choose from this evening, but does anyone have any discussion or want to propose a motion on election of officers? And I can kind of reiterate, Mr. Zer, will you help me out here? But we have 3 officers. We have chair. I think that role's fairly obvious. Vice chair, whose role is to fill in when the chair is not available. And the third role, which is currently filled by Commissioner Crane, is secretary. And secretary has a very important job of signing, providing legal signature on behalf of the commission for plats. And Mr. Grass, what else?
Most importantly, just subdivision plats.
Subdivision plats. And I think what has worked very conveniently, if anyone else was retired like Commissioner Crane, he's been available through the day, through the weekday. So that has worked very well. Mr. Grass, I'm not sure how well that would work if a secretary was not available through the weekday.
Ideally, it would make sense to have somebody that is retired, solely because when applicants approach City Hall to get documents signed, it's oftentimes under a time crunch to get those signed. So it works best to have somebody who has the free time during the day to come up and sign those documents.
So Commissioner Crane is absent tonight. As far as I know, he's still an active member of the commission. Not sure if it would be inappropriate to propose him for secretary again, and if he is not able to fill that role, then we could replace him at such time. Mr. Zer?
I believe you've done that in the past as well.
Oh, okay. So not unheard of.
Not unheard of.
Any other guidance on election of officers, Mr. Zer?
Nominations can be accepted from the floor for the organization, so anyone can nominate an individual. You're looking for a majority of the individuals for approval of the election at the end of the day, and I would start with your chair position. Right,
and Commissioner Bowie, welcome. We'll count you as present for the record as well. Commissioner Wiggins.
I would recommend or nominate Commissioner Faulkner, Chairman Faulkner, to retain his position as chairman.
And also for the record, let me welcome Commissioner Armstrong as well.
Apologies.
Oh, I know where you were. No apology needed. Okay, and just to catch you up, so far we've approved minutes from our October 16th meeting, and we're now down to the first item on new business, which is election of officers, the three positions, chair, vice chair, and secretary. And as of the moment, I think I have a motion by Commissioner Wiggins to retain Commissioner Faulkner as chair, and I have not heard a second.
I'll second it. I wasn't sure if we had the second.
Don't believe you need a second for your nomination, sir.
Oh, we don't?
Okay.
Whether or
Your
not-
job is to keep me straight. Well, as long as I'm here and have a pulse, I'm willing to continue to serve. I'm also willing to let someone else have a shot at.
That would be the next question, whether or not there are any other nominations from the individuals
Yeah.
at the board.
And are there any other nominations for position of chair? Seeing none, shall we vote? So the nomination was retain Commissioner Faulkner as chair. All those in favor, raise a hand, please. And I guess I can't vote against myself. So, yeah, I know. That's no fun. So we now have, let's see, 4, 8. We now have 8 voting. And we'll move on to the position of vice chair. And I'll nominate Commissioner Fizer to retain position of vice chair of the commission. She's filled in for me when I've had to be gone on business, and I certainly appreciate that.
I'll second.
Okay. All right, so nomination, well, yeah, I think we decided we didn't need a second. Mr. Zer trying to get us straight, but
Thanks.
are there any other nominations for vice chair? All those in favor of retaining Commissioner Fizer as vice chair, raise a hand, please. And that's 8, thank you. And for the position of secretary, I'm not sure, Commissioners Bowie and Armstrong, not sure where you might have come in on that discussion, but I think we decided that Commissioner Crane being absent did not preclude us from nominating him again for position of secretary. And one of the things about secretary, and I'm not trying to probe and ask if anybody else is retired and available through the day, but that's one of the things that makes that secretary's job work well, is that Commissioner Crane is available through the weekday as long as he's part of the commission. So somebody want to take the load off of me? Or
I'll nominate him.
Okay.
I formally nominate Commissioner Crane as Secretary of the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Thank you, Commissioner Wiggins. Are there any other nominations for secretary? Or Kia? I'm sorry. Did I just switch that? No. Okay. I really got this messed up. Okay. We'll get this straight. All right. Any other nominations for position of secretary? And seeing none, all those in favor of retaining Commissioner Crane as secretary? I think I've got 8 again. So 8 in favor, none opposed, no abstentions. Current slate of officers remains. We will move on to our next case. Oh, let's see. Well, it's not really a case. Sorry, I'm skipping something. 2019 meeting calendar. You should have in your material the proposed calendar. And Mr. Gress, would you like to speak to this?
I'd be happy to, Mr. Chair. Before you this evening, you see a draft of what our meeting schedule will look like for the upcoming 2019 year. for both Planning and Zoning Commission as well as City Council. It outlines the dates that the meetings will be held, as well as the deadlines for the submission dates for various projects that might occur that the Planning and Zoning Commission or City Council might hear. It does take into account any holidays that might occur that would affect those meetings. Those have been taken into account in the scheduling of this calendar, but that would include staff report. If you have any questions specifically for the calendar, I'd be happy to answer those.
Just one kind of in general, save me from trying to go through this line by line, but I assume that we no longer have contention with election night for council chambers, and so basically we've slotted out 2 meetings per month. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, makes sense, and can be canceled if no business remains to be conducted.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Is there any discussion on the 2019 meeting calendar, commissioners? And if not, I guess I'd entertain a motion to, what, Mr. Zur, accept the 2019 meeting calendar?
I will motion to approve the 2019 meeting calendar for the Planning and Zoning, for the Raymore Planning and Zoning Commission as presented.
Second.
Okay, motion by Commissioner Urquía, second by Commissioner Wiggins to approve the 2019 meeting calendar as presented. Is there any discussion on the motion? All those in favor, raise a hand, please. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 in favor, none opposed, no abstentions.
I do have a quick question.
Pardon?
Commissioner Bowie.
Commissioner Bowie.
Are we going to get an updated list as well? Because sometimes they come together, an updated list of the commissioners and their addresses or phone numbers, however that email addresses, et cetera. Is that forthcoming?
I hate to tell you, but I think I got one of those in my packet. So.
Did I miss it?
It should have been included in your packet for this meeting. If it wasn't, I'd be more than happy to get you a copy of that.
Okay.
Yeah, well, several of us did.
Some of us don't receive the printed packets.
Oh.
So we probably wouldn't have gotten it.
Okay,
I
so
choose to receive mine electronically.
It's probably not online. That
Was not included in the electronic packet, so I can
Right.
get the commissioners
For
who
obvious
receive the
reasons.
electronic versions. I can get you
Okay,
those
so
copies.
quick show of hands. How many commissioners need a printed copy of the roster?
No, I got it. It was hidden.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I would take an electronic version, please.
Okay. 2 for Commissioner Wiggins and Urquía. Okay. Got that? All right. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Bowie. Next on the agenda, case 18023, if I can pronounce it, Autotopia. Conditional use permit for a sign at 1000 East Hubach Hill Road. This case does require a public hearing. And also let me call your attention, I think everybody on the commission probably received a copy just this evening of the letter from Kevin Shaw, the applicant. So if you need a minute to read over that, you might take a minute before we ask the applicant to come forward and present his case. Kind of tell me when everybody's good on the letter. Huh? Oh, okay. You kids with your electronic packets.
Saving trees.
Yeah, that is a good thing, I agree.
Mr. Recycle.
Yeah, well, I do recycle. It's not quite the same. Good, all good? Mr. Mayor, you good with the letter? Okay. All right. Mr. Shaw, would you like to come forward? Make sure the microphone is lighted and... Well, I know. We do record for the minutes, though.
Okay.
So thank you.
Good there? Okay. My name is Kevin, and I really didn't think I had another choice but to go on ahead and apply for this continual, permit here. So I thought the main issue here, kind of what I want to look at, is that with this signage, and the signage and the little testing we have done with this, it's been very effective for us. We're located in kind of the southeast corner out there in the rural area. Matter of fact, if you just go across the street, I think that we are just about out of the city limits. I mean, about 15 feet across on the other side of the street, on the south side. To the east side, we're just a couple of blocks out. So we are pushed out to about the far rural area boundaries as you're going to get that way. And with that in mind, others have said, well, why don't you go on ahead and maybe use some social media or the web? Well, I've put together a nice website, and it's a very nice web. However, the demographics for this area and targeting that rural area out there, the demographics don't work with the people that we're targeting, don't work for that particular area when it comes to using the web, social media. That's not what's getting them. It's the signage. That's what gets their attention. I can't tell you how many people have stopped by and said, we had no idea, Kevin, that we had some type of professional detailing here, or any graphics, without having to drive someplace. And they said, we saw the signs, so we thought we'd give you a call and we'd give you a chance that way. So I think that's the main thing, is that the signage does work for that particular demographics out there in the rural area. And that's really what we're targeting that way. I'm not looking for any serious business that way. That's not really my purpose. I'm a professional in another type of industry, but I've been around automotive and detailing and graphics, most of my life, and had the opportunity to work in some of the finest cars in the world, when I was younger going to school. So my real issue is that what I'm looking to do is just a little bit of additional income that way, and then later on when I start backing off, give me something to do, rather than having become a commissioner, that way. So particularly after what I'm seeing tonight. So in any event, way I look at it at this point, I know it's a parochial view, but the way I look at it, it's really a win-win situation. The city would benefit. Clearly, the customers out there benefit that way. It's a necessary, I won't say necessary, but it's nice for the people out in the rural area where they're not having to drive. They actually have access to a professional detailing and graphics business out there. And that's one of the things that they don't have. And again, I just continually get this out in that rural area that way. If this was pushed in the inner city, I wouldn't even be pursuing this course of action. But since I am pushed to the boundaries right here, and I am just on the southern border, I'm just on the eastern border, the signage I'd be looking at would be on the Hubach side, as people are going really in and out of that rural area. And that's kind of what we're focusing on that way. So I thought really this was about the only avenue I could pursue to see if we could get a signage out there. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where I'm at this stage. Mm-hmm. Any questions at all for me? Or
we're kind of known for bringing you back up as we get into discussion on the case. So okay. Are there any questions for Mr. Shaw right now before we hear staff report? Commissioner Kia.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, in researching your business, or noticing that there's a high demand when you have a sign present, have you thought about or looked into renting a space or a commercial space where you could run the business out of that and have a sign? We
have, but as me being a professional in another industry, this is just part-time little side work, number one. Number two, you wouldn't be able to pay for your cost ratios for that area out there. You'd have to move into a regular commercial setting. That's not what I'm after. And quite frankly, that really doesn't target some of the rural areas out there if I go further into Raymore. Maybe it would, but that's not what I'm looking for, because this isn't anywhere near as anything like a full-time business. This is just a little part-time side business that I run that way, is what I have at least envisioned anyway. And I'm not really wanting too much more than that. So no, a commercial industry, and that's something I talked with Christian about, one of the planners. I said it doesn't work for what we're looking for. So, and I'm not sure out in Raymore the business is there to support, even if I was looking at it, you know, full-time. I'm not sure there's enough business out there with the size of Raymore, because if you look at the driving and the marketing, and if you look at those factors, marketing usually runs about 12 to 15 minutes from a business. And anything past that, you're really not going to pick up from somebody. So really, other than Raymore, some Belton, that's really all you're going to have. But it's a moot point because I'm not looking at a full-time anyway. I'm just looking at a little part-time, just some extra income coming in and providing a service for some people that appreciate it out there.
I got a question.
Commissioner Bowie, excuse me, Bowie.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. The occupational license, do you have that at this point?
Not yet, and I told David, I said, until I find out where we go, and that's one of the points I wanted to mention, is that until I find out where the signage goes, it's a waste of my time. If I don't get the signage over there, since I know it works, and the feedback that I've received, if I don't get it, it's not worth my time to pursue it anymore, because I'm not going to get it through the web or through social media. If I was targeting millennials, different issue then, but that's not where my target is. That's not the ones I'm targeting in the rural area out there. I've had a few 30s, but it's the 40, 50, 60, 70, 75 years old. That's the targets that I'm targeting there. Either can't do, won't do, or don't have the knowledge to be able to pursue it. And the millennials are not that target.
So this is only for this conditional use is for one sign?
Correct.
And will that one sign, are you saying that one sign is enough?
Yeah, at that driveway, that's all, because you get some pretty good traffic flow through there. And I have found that if somebody sees it, they pass it on to somebody else. And they see the sign, they'll pass it on to their parents or a friend or something of that nature. And so that one sign at my driveway, even if it's out in the rural area, which, like I said, it is, but it's amazing how that one sign works. Professionally, a nice quality professional sign.
But according, just reading through the packet here, it looks like the staff had observed 2 signs.
I did.
Okay,
but I've taken them down.
If I may, I feel like we're getting a little bit out of order since we haven't heard staff report yet.
Gotcha.
I don't mind questions for Mr. Shaw while he's at the podium, but
Okay.
let's not go deep into the staff report yet,
Okay.
if we may.
All right.
Thank you. Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Shaw at this moment? Commissioner Arkia.
Yeah, how have you determined who your target market is?
Well, common sense, number one. Number two, I know that in just reading and research and having a marketing background as well, is that the millennials out where I'm at, they are not my target market. I've tracked any advertising that we've tried. Every single customer I've had has come from the signage, except a few, then I've started to pick up a little bit just from word of mouth, that way. But other than that, not one single one has come from other sources. And if you look at the people that I've talked to, they fit into that target, is what we anticipated out there in that rural area.
What is your business? Can I ask that? What is your business? Exactly what do you do?
What, as a career?
No, that we're talking about.
Autotopia Detailing and Graphics. It's detailing automobiles, any shampooing, waxing, paint correction, where we get into some scratches, any show vehicles that I may be doing for some of the shows down at Sprint, and just the average Joe with their vehicles, any paint correction, any special waxing or polymers, polishing the wheels, any shampooing in the seats, pulling out some severe stains that people get into.
Are you an LLC, S Corp, C Corp?
No,
Okay.
just provider.
Okay.
And again, if I get a go, it changes some things, how I approach this. But for right now, no, I'm not going to go to that level at this point.
Yep. Okay. Thank you for now.
Okay.
Mr. Gress, if you would, give us the staff report on case 18023, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As the applicant indicated, the owner, Kevin Shaw, is requesting a conditional use permit for a sign on a residential property, more specifically for a home occupation, generally located at the northeast corner of J Highway and Hubach Hill. I've included a map that shows the rough location of his property and the kind of the context of where it's at. The property is currently zoned RE, which is our rural estate district, and is surrounded completely on all four sides by rural estate zoning, as well as single-family residential land uses on all four sides of the property. The property itself totals about 5 acres. And the future land use map and the growth management plan does identify the area as appropriate for low-density residential development. The major street plan map identifies J Highway and Hubach Hill as minor arterial roadways. And as you indicated, Mr. Chair, tonight does require a public hearing, so tonight's meeting was advertised in the October 18th edition of the Journal. Staff has outlined the requirements for a conditional use permit, and to dive into some of the previous actions on the property that Commissioner Boeing was kind of pointing to. This whole kind of request originated from a complaint that staff received regarding the placement of signs along J Highway and Hubach Hill Road. Following those complaints, our code enforcement staff kind of did some research and did identify that signs were on the property and commenced the actions related to the enforcement of those provisions specific to the sign. Staff did a little research on the property and discovered that the homeowner has been operating the home-based business without the occupational license or an actual home-based business, which does have to be approved through the city clerk. And the applicant was advised of those violations as well in the original violation letter that was sent to him. That violation letter was sent on August 8th, and the applicant was given 10 days to remove the sign and obtain a business license. Following that letter, the applicant made verbal contact with code enforcement staff and indicating that he would correct the issues that were noted in the violation. Following that, code enforcement observed that only one sign had been removed from the property and that the sign along Hubach Hill was still in place near the applicant's driveway. On September 6th, which was 17 days after his original date to correct those issues, staff made verbal contact with the owner indicating that the sign needed to be removed or an additional citation would follow. On September 7th, the applicant spoke with city staff about the different options that would allow him to keep the sign on his property, and staff advised him that the best route to go would be seeking request for a conditional use permit to allow that sign to remain on his property. The application was filed on September 24th, and since that application was filed, code enforcement staff and community development staff have placed a stay on any enforcement on the property until a final decision was made by the commission this evening. On October 27th, which was over the weekend, staff did observe that the sign was back up and in use, specifically the sign that was on Hubach Hill leading into the applicant's driveway. Based on staff's research, as I indicated, the applicant has been, and to our knowledge, still is operating without a home, or operating as an unapproved home occupation without an occupational license. And looking specifically at the requirements for signs, signage is not permitted as part of a home occupation, and that's clearly outlined in the section of the UDC that explains all the requirements for home-based occupations. In addition, signs advertising commercial messages are prohibited in residential zoning districts. The only signs that are permitted are those signs that advertise the sale or lease of a property within a residential zoning district. As I mentioned, city staff originally observed the 2 signs that were placed out along Hubach Hill Road and J Highway. The application that we're here talking about this evening would be specifically for and only for one sign to be placed along Hubach Hill Road, which would be the entrance into the applicant's property. In addition to those 2 signs, city staff has also received complaints and observed the parking of a vehicle at the end of the driveway along Hubach Hill Road as pictured in your staff report. And as you can see, by placing that vehicle there, it is acting primarily as a vehicle sign, which is also prohibited by the sign code of the UDC. The conditional use permit would not allow that vehicle to stay there, and that would continue to be a violation. And again, staff has placed a stay on any enforcement regarding those signs, all 3 of them, until a final decision can be made by the commission. Looking at the surrounding properties, there are a number of surrounding properties that do have commercial signage for home-based businesses, but those properties are located outside the city limits of Raymore, and therefore obviously are not subject to the codes and requirements that properties inside the city would be. In addition, staff is aware of only one other home occupation in the city that does have signage on their property. That property was actually, and that sign was existing prior to the adoption of our current iteration of the Unified Development Code in 2009, and city staff has identified that as a legal non-conforming sign. So essentially any changes to that sign in the future would require it to be removed. But essentially as it stands today, it's operating as a legal non-conforming sign. Number 8, you can see a table there that illustrates the requirements as for signs as they would apply to the property given its zoning designation. As you can see, the maximum size that the applicant would be allowed to be 32 square feet with a maximum height of 6 feet. We did submit proposed findings of fact for your consideration on tonight's application. And looking forward at the timeline of this meeting, should the commission place a recommendation on the application, it would go forward to City Council for first reading on November 26th and advance to second reading on December 10th. Overall, staff does recommend that the Planning and Zoning Commission accept the staff proposed findings of fact and forward case 18023 Autotopia detailing sign conditional use permit to the City Council with a recommendation of denial. The basis of that being that signs are not permitted as part of a home occupation as outlined as the requirements of the UDC. In addition, as I mentioned before, signs advertising commercial messages are not permitted in residential zoning districts unless it's advertising the sale or lease of that property. And because it's staff's opinion that allowing any home occupation to advertise commercially in a residential district really goes against the intent and purposes of the Unified Development Code and therefore should not be allowed. Additionally, however, should the commission decide to recommend approval of the application, there are provisions of our code that allow the commission to place certain restrictions or conditions on that approval. So staff has outlined 3 conditions that we believe would be appropriate to accompany approval of the application should the commission decide to recommend approval. That will conclude staff report on the item. If there's any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them for you.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Grass. Commissioner Urquilla.
This may be more for you, but if we were to approve a sign in this situation, would we be setting a precedent for future home-owned businesses that want to throw up signs as well?
I believe so, though you would have to take each one of those on a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
Okay. Let me remind you, we do have to open a public hearing, and then we'll have additional discussion. So if you have a question specifically about staff report, now's a good time.
Can I readdress?
Can I ask a question?
Commissioner Bowie.
Real quick.
Yeah, Mr. Grass, so I think at the moment we've had staff report. We've not opened the public hearing. If it's a question about staff report, I think that's appropriate.
Okay, it's just real briefly.
Commissioner Bowie.
Tell me about the signage on the vehicle. Tell me how that's considered signage, if you can give me any background on that.
Absolutely. And before I answer your question, Mr. Chair, I would just like to add to the record that because tonight did require a public hearing, it was left out of your staff report. Some of the items for the record would be the application itself.
No, sure.
The growth management plan, the staff report, the applicant's letter that they did submit with the application, and the notice of publication in the journal.
Thank you.
And the Major Street Plan included as part of the growth management plan.
Okay. Cool. Thank you, Mr. Grass. Commissioner Bowie, back to you.
The vehicle, the signage on the vehicle.
Absolutely. Thank you.
What constitutes that as being signage, considered signage, and not able to be parked about at the end of the driveway?
Great question. So as you can see, it is wrapped with the advertisements of what his business is, Autotopia Detailing. It might be a little hard to see in the picture, but the vehicle is wrapped with a little bit of signage and advertisement. And as I mentioned, vehicle signs are prohibited strictly by the UDC unless they're directly related to the business that is operating. So the example that I'll give is our Big Daddy's Donuts that you have in the Willow Inn Shopping Center. They use that vehicle to deliver donuts between stores to different schools or facilities throughout the community. So the use of that vehicle as a delivery vehicle is directly tied to that. Now, they don't necessarily park it out, directly on 58 to use as advertising, which is why that sign would be allowed. A similar case can be made for the mattress man who uses that vehicle to deliver mattresses to his clients or customers. In this case, being that the driveway is extensively long and the house is set so far back from the property, there's ample space to park that vehicle elsewhere, aside from essentially within the right-of-way at the end of the driveway. So it's staff's belief that based on the location of that vehicle and the way it's wrapped, we can only believe that it's being placed there solely for the purposes of advertising the business that takes place on the property.
Okay, so if it was approved, he'd be required to only have one sign, and so that vehicle will constitute two signs. He'd have to park that vehicle closer to the house as opposed to at the end of the driveway with the other sign, hypothetically.
Correct. The vehicle sign would not be allowed given the approval or denial of the application this evening, because the vehicle sign is prohibited no matter what.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Kia. I'm sorry.
That's two.
That's two. Who's counting?
Do we need a trade
I was gonna say, do we need to redo officer?
I'm so sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. A couple quick questions, Mr. Grass. Discussed, Commissioner Bowie mentioned the mobile. Is there, obviously I understand the idea behind, a delivery vehicle being something that's used for, would have graphics on it. Is there some sort of time constraint or restriction? Like if, let's say it's, out on the front only on Saturdays and Sundays, or has it been observed, all hours of the day, various days of the week, or is it very limited in the time it's there? And would that, if that serves as a sign, is there maybe something there that could serve as, certain hours or certain restrictions in which the sign could be displayed, so to say? Is there anything associated with that? I guess it's a sign, so it's a sign, so it would be there all the time. But
for clarification, are you speaking about the vehicle sign or the sign that they're requesting?
The vehicle that's parked at the end of the driveway that we deem as being a sign, because it's not necessarily used as a delivery vehicle, like you mentioned, the Mattress Man and Big Daddy's Donuts. But is there a time limit? Like I think of, some neighborhoods around here you can't park an RV in your driveway for more than X amount of hours or X amount of days without it becoming a violation of that particular, covenant or whatever the case may be. Do we have anything that says, a vehicle parked in a single location more than 3 hours that advertises a business constitutes a sign? Do we have something in place?
There are restrictions that the city does have. They're more, not specifically related to signs, but more so the parking of vehicles and how long they can stay there. And for the basis of enforcement of specifically this sign, it's really based on staff's observance of the sign when it is, and then generally it's 24 hours later if the vehicle's still there. It's not necessarily a violation, but it's more so staff tracking when the vehicle's there, how long they see it there.
Very good. Okay.
And the times that we observed it, it's pretty sporadic. It doesn't seem like he's parking it there for, months
Right, it's not sitting
end.
there for a month at a time.
Right,
Okay.
right. It's pretty sporadic on when the vehicle's been there from what staff has observed.
Okay, and then I didn't know if there's any additional information. You mentioned that the city has received a few complaints, obviously, when people have political signs or whatever in their yard outside of certain windows. Is there any particular nature of the complaints, or is it just general, I observed a commercial sign in a residential lot, or is there something, is there a consistent one person that's calling, complaining, or is there multiple complaints from multiple people that, has brought this issue up to the forefront?
Sure. The city to this date has only received one complaint, and that was the original complaint that really got this application in motion. And if I remember correctly, the basis of that complaint was the number of signs that were on the property between the two the two wooden signs that the applicant had up, as well as the vehicle sign. And if I remember correctly, the complaint was the location and how that interferes with the visibility of the intersection there at J Highway and Hubach Hill.
Okay. And sorry, third and final question for staff. Has there been any sort of, and I guess I can probably answer the question by assumption, but has there been any discussion with neighbors, or have there been other people to support the applicant in any of their, has anybody come forward to the city? Or obviously it's not really, doesn't really matter what the neighbors necessarily think because it's UDC, but obviously I didn't know if cities heard from other people in support or in disagreement.
Sure. Because it was a public hearing, notices were sent to, I believe, 11 property owners around the property. Staff did not receive any phone calls or complaints about that request or any complaints about the sign following the original complaint. And I haven't heard any support or opposition to the request since those notices were sent out.
Okay. With that, Mr. Zerr, I would turn to you. I do see an audience member who is raising their hand when I brought that topic up. Would that come later as part of the public hearing?
I'm still trying to open the public hearing, so.
Well, that is it for me for city staff questions. I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Okay.
I do want to ask, how long has the current signs been up, out of curiosity?
So to my knowledge, the signs are no longer in place. As I mentioned, it was observed on, I believe, October 27th by a city staff member who just happened to be in the area over the weekend.
How long had they been up?
To our knowledge, we were not aware of them until we received the original
That would
complaint.
be a question maybe for the, okay.
Okay. Before I open the public hearing on case 18023, Autotopia conditional use permit for a sign at 1000 East Hubach Hill Road, we'd ask If anyone from the public wishes to speak, come forward to the podium. Please give us your name and address for the record. Be sure the microphone's lighted, and normally we'd ask that you limit your comments to a few minutes. I don't think we should have a problem this evening. So the public hearing on case 18023 is now open. Anyone from the public is welcome to come forward.
My name is Clay Hubach. I'm at 1002 East Hubach Hill Road. I will do my best to keep my discussion under 3 minutes, but I am my mother's son, so that will be a challenge. Kevin has always been an excellent neighbor. The sign, because it's up against his white picket fence, is not an eyesore by any means. It's very tastefully done. Having said that, something I think that would be good for the commissioners to consider, while we call it residential, there's approximately one house per every 5 acres. Our house is on 5.3 acres. So by, I think, state, they consider that homestead. That's far different than in the city where it's 20 houses to that same amount of space. So a signage ordinance that would be appropriate when there's 4 houses or 5 houses to the acre. Obviously, if everybody had a 32 square foot sign on that high a density, it'd be billboard row, quite honestly. But when you're out on 5, 6, 7 acres, a tasteful sign that is well done in an area that does lend itself to cottage industry, like detailing is a hobby. That may require some additional thought in the future to create something that, what if it was a vet that had a home office, or someone that took care of horseshoes, because we have a lot of horses in the area. You know, there, with 5 acres, you can do a lot and still be very attractive to the neighbors and a vital part to the community. So from our standpoint, I've discussed it with my mother, both of us are very much in agreement that the sign that he has is very appropriate for what he's doing. And when you asked about the time that his vehicle is there, I know Kevin works a regular job, so when I see the car, I know he's home and I can go down and talk to him. So those are little cues when you're out in the country, you kind of rely upon. And not every business can afford the overhead of moving into a strip center or into a commercial. And you need to be able to start up somewhere. Even Apple started in a garage, and look what happened. So where do we have incubator capabilities? Well, there's a lot of people that will look to these 5 acres and say, you know what, when I retire from being a full-time mechanic, maybe there's something I want to do. I have a neighbor that loves to keep bees, but he doesn't have a sign and nobody knows it, just because where the signage is. But that's typical of what you would see on homesteads. So that type of neighborly advertising that's very tastefully done should be considered. How do we incorporate that into the future of the ordinances, and respecting that 5 acres is different than a 1/4 acre. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Hubach. Would anyone else from the public like to speak on this case? And
I'm the public. I'd like to speak again.
please come.
Okay. Well, okay, to answer a couple of questions on this car, is that number one, if I get the signage, then I can remove the car.
Yeah.
Number two, where is the cutting point? Is it 5 feet from the end of the street? Is it 10 feet? Is it 15 feet? Is it past my mailbox? Where does my driveway constitute an issue where I park that car? Mm-hmm. I don't see anything that states specifically where I can park and where I can't park in my driveway with my car, and particularly the people that I have pulling. If I had a nickel for every time somebody pulled in that driveway, I'd be a wealthy man. Sometimes I'll block that driveway just because I've already had damage to the culvert area over there, and they've crushed it down, and from people pulling in and heavier vehicles. So I park a vehicle down there. If it's not going to be that one, a lot of times, particularly on weekends, I'll pull a vehicle down there. But right now, yeah, it's been the vehicle, because I've tried to take advantage of this to see, again, does the signage work? Is it working for me? And it is. If I get the signage, then I can pull the vehicle right back up to where it belongs. Thirdly, is that I use that as my company vehicle when I'm out and about. So when I get home at 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, that's when it goes down there, particularly with the night shutting down. It'll probably be there probably a couple of hours now, except for maybe a weekend where maybe I'll have it out maybe 5 or 6 hours, you know, on a Saturday or Sunday that way. But that's specifically to address, Eric, your question in dealing with the vehicle that way. And I can tell you exactly that that's what's working with the vehicle. But I won't have to worry about that if I get that little professional sign right there at the end of the driveway. Okay, just to clarify those points for you.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Don't go away. Oh, public hearing's still open, Mr. Zer.
If I might, real quickly on this, and just to make sure that we are making a clear and accurate record for this evening, the vehicle itself has not been identified as the requested application for this evening. It's my understanding, is that correct? You have not requested to use the vehicle as your sign for this property.
Correct.
So with the approval of the sign, there is a reference in here, and I guess my question for the applicant would be, is the proposed sign the same proposed sign that has been placed out there at the edge of the property so far?
Correct. And I have a picture if you just want to see it.
That would be appropriate, and I would ask you to please describe it for the commission's members this evening. What it's constructed of, what it says on it, how large it is, and how it has been placed.
It's a white 1/4 inch aluminum, and it's, you want to see a picture of it?
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, I think the easiest is just
pass it down.
yeah. That works great.
I have 2 white posts that match my white, all done in petroleum. This is a 4x3, but I could take it down to 3x2. This is a 4x3, which doesn't look very big for 5 acres worth.
Only on one side, but not double-sided?
I did have it double-sided, but the one side really is the critical.
And if I may interrupt, just to clarify, the 4x3 size that he's describing and the double-sided sign would comply with the regulations that would apply to the property.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Okay,
I had one more question, unless you want to close the hearing.
well,
It'll be the applicant.
your choice. Go ahead.
How long have you been operating as a business?
For a number of months, I don't know exactly, but for a few months, we've been running a test market here again with the sign, then when it got old, it's kind of died out. The car has helped some, but that's why I say the signage is absolutely critical. And even in the few months that we've run, we've got a pretty good handle on how well it works. It's gotten the attention of the people out there significantly. We took the sign down from the J Highway, which, if you saw it positioned, it was not an obstruction to anywhere the way it was positioned back in the pasture. So that is just not accurate at all, and I can prove it if you just look at the ingress and egress as you pass by there. But it's gone anyway, so that's a moot point. And really, the business came from the Hubach sign, and because again, I tracked, where did you see this? What did you see? How did you hear? I asked everybody I talked to, and it really hasn't been the Hubach sign. So that wasn't really a big loss that way. The one, the J Highway sign.
Right.
The one on Hubach, that will be the loss. And I'm gonna lose them both, like I said.
Okay.
It's not worth my time.
No, thank you, Mr. Shaw. All right.
Yes, thank you.
We don't normally go for second round, Mr. Hubach.
You asked about the date. On July 28th, I was hoping, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
You asked about the date.
I asked about how long it had been running
Yes.
as a business.
I know
That's it.
that on July 28th, I was assisting with a catering job where in wrapping up and bringing all supplies back, I accidentally squished a gallon jug of barbecue sauce all over my interior, and he had just put the sign up. So approximately August and September.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Would anyone else from the public like to speak? And seeing no one, my one chance to whack the gavel. Public hearing is closed, and the case is open for continuing discussion from the commission. Commissioner Boyd?
I'd like to see a picture of the barbecue sauce. No, I'm just kidding. Sorry. Just to clarify, there's been one complaint. Did I hear that right? Did I hear that right? Just one complaint thus far? Yes. Okay. All right. Thank you.
I got a question.
Yeah, Commissioner. Okay.
And I suspect it was the J Highway sign, and that's why, I mean, that came down immediately after talking with Christian, so.
All right. Commissioner Peterman.
Do I understand right that you don't have an occupational license and you're not probably going to get one if you can't get signage approved?
Correct.
On the record?
Correct. Unless I get signage approval, I'm not going to mess with it. It's not worth my time because I'm not, again, the website, social media does not work. The signage does. So if it doesn't, there's no point in pursuing it any further then.
So you're
And
not,
if we do, then we will.
so
It all
you're
comes
not
down to
going to be
signs.
in business if you can't get signage?
There's no point. There's no signage. There's nothing to generate that way. So no, unless I get the signage, we don't go any further, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Arkia?
I don't have a question. I was just going to make a motion to, sorry, hang on. I'm going to make a motion to accept the staff recommended, or the staff proposed findings of fact in forward case 18023 Autotopia Detailing Sign Conditional Use Permit to City Council with a recommendation of denial.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. Motion by Commissioner Arkia, second by Commissioner Pfizer to accept staff proposed findings of fact and forward case 18023 Autotopia Detailing Sign Conditional Use Permit to City Council with a recommendation of denial. Let's see. Okay. Motion by Commissioner Arkia, second by Commissioner Pfizer. Is there any discussion on the motion? Commissioner Wiggins.
Thank you. Just for clarification, or just to say this out loud, that obviously, ultimately will be up to the city council. We're just passing along a recommendation, but even if we had a motion that was opposite of that, it still would go to them, and it's ultimately their decision, so it's not necessary. Okay, just wanted to say that out loud. Thank you.
Yeah, and for the record, I guess let's note Mr. Zer nodding in agreement. Thank you, Mr. Zer.
Okay, I got a couple things.
Commissioner Bowie.
Before we go with the second.
Well, we've got a second on the motion. We're in discussion on the motion.
Okay. Okay. Just had a couple things that I was looking at. But if we're...
Yeah, sorry.
No, we can just go ahead.
Well, if it's germane to the case, I mean, we're going to go ahead and proceed to take a vote on the motion after discussion. So if it's germane to the case, I think now is a good time for discussion.
And this may be for staff. Would you say that this sign was compatible? Because there was, you mentioned there were some other businesses maybe in the area that were outside of the same zone. Would you say that if the sign was there, it would be compatible with the area?
I don't believe so, because if those signs that are currently there were inside city limits, based on the fact that those would be home-based businesses within a residential district, they would not be allowed anyway. So therefore, if those signs were there, they would not be compatible, because if they were in the city limits, they wouldn't be allowed.
I don't think he's done. Okay. Commissioner Wiggins.
So you mentioned inside the city limits, and obviously it's not our place because we're just Raymore, but I mean, across the road is outside of city limits. That's Cass County. I guess, you know, if the applicant supposedly knew who owned the land across the street from them, and if the county had no restrictions, we would have no say as a city about them pursuing signage across the street that's advertising his business if he had an agreement with somebody outside of the city. It's in the county, and
You are correct.
follows. Okay, just want to confirm.
Without providing a legal analysis of what the county's rules are with regard to signage.
Other questions, comments from the commission? I will make a comment based on my time on Planning and Zoning Commission. I can remember a time when we had pole signs and a lot of concerns about the appearance of Raymore. We've made, I think Mr. Gress may have said 2009. Does that sound about right? We've made changes to Unified Development Code, and I would say tightened restrictions on signs throughout the city, commercial areas primarily, and over a long period of time, because existing pole signs were grandfathered. There probably are still a few if I were to look, but over a period of time, I think we've made major strides in improving the appearance of Raymore and making it more appealing. And in my opinion, sign code was a key part of that. So while I don't particularly have an objection to this one sign, I do have concerns about the precedent setting and the fact that if we allow this sign, then it really makes it fairly difficult to turn down similar conditional use permits for signage for home-based business. And Mr. Zur, I'll call on you once more. Just, does that opinion sound in concert with the code?
Every application that you receive will be subject, for a sign, will be subject to a conditional use permit. As a commission, you're going to have to review the findings of fact each time, identified 1 through 6, in making your determination based upon the property and the proposed sign that's being presented to you. I would tell you that having a sign within the residential area does open up an opportunity for individuals within the community to come back in and say, it will be just like the following listed signs that you have. But each case will be identified on its own merits, and evaluated pursuant to the findings of fact that you see this evening.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Zur. And if you would, I want to express one more opinion, but I'd like your either agreement or disagreement. So one of the other things that I've learned over the years about conditional use permits is, and I'm not trying to trivialize it, but a conditional use permit in my mind means it depends, and it not only depends on the particular request, but it also depends on the surrounding area and existing homes or existing uses around the area that's requesting a conditional use. So I think Mr. Hubach made a good point about this being an RE zoning large lot estate. I wonder how much the it depends factor might negate the negative, I think, of setting a precedent here for all home-based businesses. Mr. Zur.
I feel like you're asking us to make a determination on our opinions with regard to the findings of fact, and with regard to that, I'd simply point you back to the staff's recommendations that have been outlined. You do note on there under number 5 for the findings of fact that the size, location, height, et cetera, are all identifiable on their impact on the general welfare of the neighborhood or the surrounding community. You do have staff's input with regard to that under the terms of the staff report.
That's fine. Thank you, Mr. Zur. Commissioner Urquilla, did I see a hand? Okay. Any other questions or comments before we take a vote? Commissioner Armstrong?
Well, not so much a question, but I just a statement. Part of the job of the commission, I thought, was to promote the growth of the community, and a signage ordinance that limits that seems counterproductive in my mind. If this is a conditional use permit, then my understanding of what Mr. Zur is saying is that each of those would then be approved individually, allowing input from the commission if there are issues that for that particular use that are counterproductive.
Mr. Grass or Mr. Zur, would you like to address Commissioner Armstrong's question?
Very good point. And as you mentioned, we do the best that we can to promote businesses within the community. However, this presents a little bit of a special case that you wouldn't typically find in a commercial area where you would find the signage. The intent behind our home-based occupation regulations is to promote businesses for areas that, like the applicant said, might not be able to afford the commercial space that might be required for any given type of business. However, in placing a commercial business within a neighborhood, you're significantly affecting the character of what a residential neighborhood was designed to do, which is house people and not primarily act as a business operation. So by allowing signs within a home-based business within a residential neighborhood, it's at least staff's belief that you're even further impacting the character of the neighborhood by making the presence of that business even more known than it would be if it was just contained solely within the house itself.
Commissioner Bowie?
Sorry, quick, just a quick sort of a statement also. As I look at this, I ask myself, will this have a significant adverse impact on the general welfare of the neighborhood or community? And then will it cause any harm, injury to the value of other property in the neighborhood? Is it compatible with the character of the surrounding property? You know, you mentioned that earlier, and then he also mentioned, Mr. Hubach also mentioned that the size of some of the lots out there in terms of being 4 or 5 acres, et cetera. So and all those things I think have to be taken in consideration, and that's kind of what I'm looking at and thinking about. So that's all I want to say. I'm sorry.
No, that's right. Commissioner Arquilla.
Yeah, similar lines of Commissioner Bowie there as far as just thoughts and comments. I would counter what you were saying with the fact that we have a UDC that we put into place in 2009 that we charged our city staff to help us create and to help us help the city grow in a strategic manner. And anytime I think we go contrary to that or set up, you know, regardless if we get to hear every case that comes before us, how many more cases are we going to hear moving forward once word gets out that we've approved one sign, regardless of its location, regardless of the type of land it's currently on, if we don't first look at trying to amend what types of properties could have a sign and simply begin by approving a sign. So based off what we have before us tonight and my thought around those pieces, that's why I recommended to approve the staff recommendation to forward it on to the city council with a denial.
Thank you, Commissioner Arquilla. Any further discussion? Sorry, Mr. Zur.
Chairman, one more item, and again, this is just for purposes of making the record on the matter. I believe you all had the opportunity to review a picture. I have requested from the applicant that they provide a copy of that picture via email to staff so that it can be incorporated and made a part of the public record for this evening's discussion, as well as anything that gets put forwarded along to the City Council for their final consideration.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Zur. Any further discussion before we take a vote on the motion? All right, so the motion on the floor by Commissioner Arquilla, second by Commissioner Fizer, was to accept staff proposed findings of fact on case 18023, Autotopia conditional use permit for a sign at 1000 East Hubach Hill Road, and forward the case to City Council with a recommendation of denial. If there's no further discussion, remember, the motion is for denial. All those in favor, raise a hand, please. 6. Okay. I have 6 in favor, opposed, 2 opposed, and that leaves no abstentions. And as is our custom, I'll give the 2 votes in opposition, Commissioner Armstrong and Commissioner Bowie, an opportunity to put their reasons for voting against the motion on the record, if you would. Commissioner Bowie?
I think I just sort of laid that out previously about kind of my feelings about it in terms of where it's located, the location of it, the fact that each one of these cases have to be taken on their own merit. And although we could say that, oh, there's a precedence could be set, I don't necessarily think so, because we're going to have a fresh set of eyes on every single case, and we're going to look at each one. And I think there are some variables that matter that should be taken into consideration for each specific case. If this was a home located in the middle of Stonegate, that's a little different than being out on 4.5 acres off Hubach Hill Road. So I think there are some things that we need to look at in terms of just understanding that, yes, there's a UDC in place, but there are some special circumstances.
Thank you. Commissioner Armstrong.
And I would reiterate Commissioner Bowie's statements. I laid out most of my questions earlier, but I think the fact that it's currently what is in the UDC doesn't mean that we are regimented by that, and I think that's what the provisional use permission is for. That's the use for that act. Thank you.
Thank you both for those opinions. Just for the record, Mr. Zer, keep me honest here, but we do have a majority of the commission voting in favor of the motion, which recommends denial. The motion, the case now goes to City Council for their consideration, and that'll be the next step. All right, thank you very much. Moving along, the last case under new business this evening is case 18025, 29th Amendment to the Unified Development Code. And this case also requires a public hearing. And in this 29th Amendment case, applicant is City of Raymore. Mr. Gress, please.
Thank you again, sir. As you mentioned, we're here this evening to talk again about the proposed 29th Amendment to the Unified Development Code, which relates specifically to the design requirements for sidewalks on residential lots throughout the city. If you recall, to one of our previous meetings, I believe back in August, we had talked about some of the outcomes of the annual review of the Unified Development Code and subsequently the proposed 28th Amendment that you all approved shortly after that meeting. 2 of the items that were originally included that were tabled at the request of the commission under the direction that staff should conduct some additional research on the design requirements of sidewalks and kind of get a feel for what other communities are doing throughout our area. And so, pending our research, we then came back to the commission and presented those findings on the different costs that are associated with sidewalk changes and an overall overview of what other communities do. And following that discussion, it was the commission's direction for staff to bring that back to the commission for a formal decision and final vote on whether or not we would decide to move forward with that. So here we are this evening. As you mentioned, because it does require a public hearing, again, tonight's meeting was advertised in the October 18th edition of the Journal, and items of record for the application include the Growth Management Plan, the Unified Development Code, the Notice of Publication in the Journal, and the staff report itself. Staff has outlined the requirements for a code text amendment for your consideration, and just some of the comments to kind of reiterate and kind of refresh your minds on what we're here to talk about this evening. The proposed 29th Amendment would include 2 sections. The first section would modify the language that would require the sidewalk to be installed on the right-of-way line to a width of 5 feet versus what it currently is, which is 1 foot off of the property line. So extending that to the property line is where you would get that additional 1 foot. And then Section 2 would then propose an increase in the minimum width of a sidewalk on a local street or a private drive from 4 feet to 5 feet. There would be a provision that any sidewalk constructed in a residential subdivision phase with a final plat that was recorded prior to January 1st of 2019, the sidewalks in that neighborhood would be able to remain at 4 feet. Again, sidewalk would be required on both sides of all public streets, and those are typically installed prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy during the building and construction phase of the home. Of the research that staff conducted, staff indicated that there were 4 cities of the standard list that the city uses to compare itself to others around the community. 5 of those cities have 4-foot standard for sidewalks, and 7 of them have 5-foot standards for sidewalks, so they're quite spread across the board. In addition, staff has provided the table that you all saw before that outlines at least the estimated cost increase for 5-foot sidewalks versus 4-foot sidewalks on corner and standard lots throughout the city. Staff has submitted proposed findings of fact for your consideration. And again, looking at the schedule of the application moving forward, should the commission make a recommendation on the action tonight, it would move forward for first reading on December 10th by City Council and second reading on January 14th of 2019. Staff does recommend that the commission accept the proposed findings of fact and forward case 18025, the 29th Amendment to the Unified Development Code, to City Council with a recommendation of approval. Staff has included a draft of the bill that would accompany the staff report at City Council, as well as an excerpt from our previous meetings. Should you have any questions on those, I'd be happy to answer them, but that would conclude staff report on this item.
Thank you, Mr. Gress. I think it's appropriate to open the public hearing on case 18025, 29th Amendment to the Unified Development Code, sidewalks, and remembering my previous guidance, if anyone from the public wishes to speak on this case, please come forward to the podium, state your name and address for the record, and again, we'd ask that you limit your comments to a few minutes if possible. Would anyone like to speak on case 18025, 29th Amendment to UDC sidewalks? And seeing none, that's the last of the gavel for the evening, and the case is now open for discussion by the commission. Mayor Turnbow.
In the previous discussions, I had expressed a trepidation to this particular thing. Since raising the 4 to 5 foot limits on our sidewalks, I've had an opportunity to speak to staff on several occasions. I've also had an opportunity to talk to several mayors at different meetings that I've attended who have the 5-foot restriction, and I will be supporting the staff proposed findings of fact tonight if that is moved forward in such a fashion. They have convinced me that it's a good move for our community. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mayor Turnbow. Commissioner Wiggins.
I also had kind of given some resistance on this, and I made sure to take note last week on Halloween, pulling my twins in a wagon down the street around my neighborhood on 4-foot sidewalks, and how many times myself or some of the other patrons had to ditch into the yard. So maybe the question is 5 foot even enough? But we're not going to go there tonight. Obviously, I would want to continue to keep discussion going, but at the same time, I would be more than happy to make a motion unless anybody else has any more things to say.
I'll make one observation, noting staff comments number 9, and as Mr. Gress said, I believe surrounding communities that we benchmarked, 5 currently require 4 feet, 7 require 5 feet. I did note that 3 of the surrounding communities here to Raymore, Belton, Harrisonville, Grandview, are still at 4 feet. Peculiar is not. They're at 5 feet. And I guess my comment is I'm not vehemently opposed to moving the requirement to 5 feet, but I'm also not seeing a particular hurry. So I'm probably a little more in the middle of this, just for the discussion. Any other commissioners?
Yeah, just want to jump
Commissioner
in.
Bowie?
I like it. I think it adds to the walkability of the, 10, 15, 20 years down the road, the walkability of the city. So I appreciate it. I'm kind of on the opposite end of, or where they were, I guess I could say. All right.
Mm-hmm. Any other commissioners' comments or hands on the triggers? Okay, or a motion.
Yeah, I'm just waiting to second your motion. Go ahead.
I will make a motion to, I'm totally forgetting exactly what I'm supposed to say, to forward case 18025. Yeah, I guess I could read this. Yeah, to accept this, staff recommends Planning and Zoning Commission accept the staff proposed findings of fact, forward case 18025, the 29th Amendment to the UDC, to the City Council with a recommendation of approval to increase future sidewalk width to 5 foot.
I'll second the motion.
Oh, go ahead.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right. And it's hard to look both ways at once. So let's see if I can restate this. Yeah, I know. I'm going to try. I'm doing well to get the names straight here, you understand. Working on it. Motion by Commissioner Wiggins, second by Commissioner Urquilla to accept staff proposed findings of fact and forward case 18025, 29th Amendment to the UDC to City Council with recommendation of approval. Mr. Zer, does that meet with your approval as well? All right. Is there any discussion on the motion? We'll take a vote on it then. All those in favor of the motion to accept staff findings of fact and forward to City Council with recommendation of approval? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Wow. Okay. 8 in favor, none opposed, no abstentions. Thank you. That takes us on to the next agenda item. Mr. Zer, would you give us the City Council report, please?
Chairman, I'm happy to do so. Since your last Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, there has been one City Council meeting where business has been conducted. That occurred on October 22nd, 2018. During the course of that conversation, there were 2 items that have previously come before this commission for consideration. The first was the rezoning and the preliminary plat, as well as the final plat for the lofts that you all had the opportunity to review back on October 16th, as well as the rezoning and preliminary plan for the industrial development portion here in Raymore. You might recall either of those 2 items. In order for the matters to be heard on a consolidated basis, the applicants had, in order to comply with all code requirements, those 2 items were continued. The lofts evaluation for an entire package was continued to November 13th, 2018. And the rezoning and the preliminary plan for the industrial development was continued to November 26, 2018. In addition to that, the only other things I would add would be the reappointment of Commissioner Wiggins to the Planning and Zoning Commission and the appointment of Mr. Peterman to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Welcome to you, sir. That's all I have for the City Council report. I obviously would always welcome the mayor to chime in, as he has attended every one of those as well.
Mayor Turnbow, I can't see you. Nothing to add. Nothing to add. Okay. Wanted to make sure you had the opportunity. All right. Moving along, Mr. Gress, would you like to start the staff report?
Thank you, sir. First, I would like to apologize for the fact that the commission did not receive a department monthly report for the month of October. With the amount of activity going on, we're a little bit behind in getting that to you, but it will be available at your next meeting. First off, I would just like to say we kind of talked about at previous meetings the state conference that occurred in Kansas City this year for the Missouri chapter of the American Planning Association. Mr. Carteret and myself both did attend that conference, as well as Mr. Bowie. I ran into him a few times there and actually saw him in a couple sessions. Very successful. It's always good to hear what other communities are doing to address similar situations and issues that we face here in Raymore. So very educational, took a lot away, and I hope that Commissioner Bowie enjoyed his time there and in and around downtown Kansas City. It's always fun to get away from Raymore for a little bit. Looking at our upcoming meetings, our next meeting is scheduled for November 20th. Currently, the only application that we have, at least on track to be heard at that meeting, would be the 3rd plat of the Timber Trails subdivision. Being that item will be on consent agenda, there's not really a lot of opportunity for a whole lot of discussion on that, so staff is working to put together some sort of maybe educational presentation or maybe just generate some discussion with the commission overall to talk about different topics that we've discussed over the last several meetings. At this point, that would be the only item that would be scheduled for that meeting, and certainly we'll update the commission if anything is to appear in that in the future. That will include staff report from our department. I would call on Mr. Rokos to give any updates that engineering and public works might have.
All right. Mr. Rokos, please.
There are 2 projects going on. I know one of your favorites is always 155th Street. We did close the road again last week, and as we are widening it 4 feet to the north, And that work continues as weather permits, and hopefully the weather will improve as it, if you watch the forecast right now, it doesn't look very promising, but we will continue to pursue that, and the project's planned to be completed the end of the month, the Friday, I think it's the first Friday in December. I think it's December 3rd they have it planned to be completed. The other project that we're working hard on, despite the weather conditions, is at Hawk Ridge Park. We continue to make improvements up there. If you haven't seen some of them, you'll see that there are certain things going in, and there's a lot of construction going on up there, and we hope to have that completed on time. Despite the weather turning kind of cold on us all of a sudden, we've been able to do a lot of construction in November and December the last couple of years, and this year doesn't look as promising, so we'll continue to pursue them. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Rokas. Any questions for staff? No? Okay. At this time, one last opportunity for the public to speak. I'll open the floor for any public comments as we bring the meeting to a close. And seeing no one from the public, I'll go to commission member comment. I hope I didn't do this last time, but Commissioner Bowie, may I start with you this evening?
Final comment. Enjoyed myself at the APA Bi-State. I was there for one day. Good takeaways, lots of good information. I went to one session learning about the development of Metcalf, a speaker, from I-635 in Metcalf all the way south to 123rd Metcalf. 30-year plan, hundreds of millions of dollars, very interesting. Same with downtown Lenexa. There was a young lady presenting on that, and the gentleman from KCK presented on the legends and that whole development, how it came about and all that. So very interesting in that particular session to get feedback and information about other parts of the city and how those things are handled throughout. So I enjoyed the day, though. It was very, very well put together, and if you get a chance, I guess it comes annually, so maybe next year, I would recommend it to anyone on the Planning and Zoning Commission. Thank you to staff. Appreciate your time.
And Commissioner Bowie, feel free to share that experience with the rest of the commission as we have cases where it fits. Thank you. I think I'll just keep on going from this side. Commissioner Peterman.
I'm just happy to be here, be a part of the commission. Looking forward to the learning experience. That's all I got.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Armstrong.
Just thank you to staff for your time and attention.
One more chance to get this wrong. Commissioner Wiggins.
Thank you to the chairman for not calling me Commissioner Urquia again. As always, thank you, staff. I know there's a lot of hard work that goes into things, as well as last night's presentation. Some of us were at the City Council work session. Great job as well. Look forward to hearing what comes of that. I believe our session ended with there being a future presentation possibly to us, so I really look forward to that and seeing how we can potentially work with some of our developers that are waiting in the wings to make universal design impact way more. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Fizer.
Yeah, I would kind of echo Commissioner Wiggins' comments about last night's joint meeting. I thought the universal design ideas, I mean, I always liked it, but I think it's a great idea to pursue further and kind of expose more people to what it is. And also I'd like to comment that this morning I voted at the RAC, and I didn't have to wait outside in the pasture. I was all prepared with my parka and my mittens and my hat, and just walked right in. And so I think it's a wonderful addition to our city. Thank you.
Glad to hear. All right, Commissioner Urquia for real.
Thank you. I would echo your comments on the new voting locations. We had the opportunity to vote at Centerview, and I got home this evening around 6:15, and I think I emailed Jim to let him know I may or may not make it because my wife got to go vote before me, and she was back in about 25 minutes. So I was able to actually vote and still make it to the meeting in time. So it was nice to see these new spaces put to use and efficiently and effectively. I'd also like to thank welcome my cohort from Ward 2, Commissioner Peterman. Pleasure to have you. And as always, thank you, staff, for all that you do and for bringing information to us that makes it easier for us to discuss and come up with the best plan to help Raymore move forward. So again, thank you all for what you do.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mayor Turnbow.
Sure. Jim, welcome. It's good to have you up here on the commission side instead of just sitting in the audience all the time. I appreciate your willingness to serve on the commission. Then just to remind everybody, we have the Veterans Day celebration this Friday at 4 o'clock at Memorial Park. Please try to get there. We're going to have an Admiral, Admiral Stan Thompson I served with in the reserves, is going to talk about World War I naturally, and he's going to dress in that period uniform as well. And we'll dedicate the new flagpole there and make mention of the new flag receptacle that we have for retiring flags. That was a part of an Eagle Scout project by Jacob Collins. It's a very nice addition to our park, and it does give someone who wonders what they do with their old United States flags, what to do with. This is a secure receptacle, and they will be retired appropriately by the Boy Scout troop. So that's a nice addition to our community. And then just last thing, I was a little curious. You're talking about the APA conference, David. Instead of saying it's always good to hear and experience other perspectives, you said it's good to get away from Raymore for a while. What's that all about?
Not to be taken negatively, sir.
It's hard to follow those comments. I have very little to add except...
You do a great job. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Mayor Turnbow. As always, and please don't take this for granted, thank you to staff. Without your support, we could not do what we do. I think it will be interesting to follow the cases this evening on to City Council and see what their determination is, but I appreciate the commission and appreciate the good turnout this evening. Thank you all. I know this takes time away from other activities, and it's certainly appreciated. Again, I don't take that for granted either, so thank you all for being here. Mr. Gress, you think it would be appropriate to inform Commissioner Crane that he's been elected secretary again for another year? Maybe hold that phone at safe distance.
I will make the phone call in the morning, sir.
Okay, and if he has issues with that, we'll take that up at a future meeting. Nothing else to add. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Who said that? Commissioner Kia. Second. Commissioner Bowie.
Oh, you just entertained the motion. You didn't make the motion. I'm sorry.
Oh,
He made the motion.
I think he made the motion. I'm looking for a second.
You entertained it. He made it. I'll second.
Thank you.
All right.
All those in favor of adjourning tonight's meeting, raise a hand, please. And it's 8 in favor, none opposed, no abstentions. Thank you all.